It really is a great privilege to be here and to be engaging with this community of scholars. I'm really chuffed to see the combination of higher education from the publics and higher education from the privates. I think that bodes well for the future, and it starts to talk to a national higher education system that we should all be aspiring towards. I really look forward to seeing more engagements like this and pulling colleagues in together to address issues that are common to all of us, where we're all kind of striving towards the same goals. I'm also really glad to note the kind of connections that have been created through a range of activities supported by the UCDP and the impetus that that's creating in the sector. I think that really also is a good idea coming to fruition. But thank you to, I think, the colleagues who are taking on those opportunities and running with them. So I interpreted the brief to just give you a kind of broad scoping of the postgraduate sector in South Africa at the national level. And you will see some duplication in the presentations with the presentations that have gone before. And I'll try not to kind of emphasize too much on areas that have been covered already. But it is a data-based presentation and a data-rich presentation. And I want to take as my starting point the idea that if we're conceptualizing or trying to grow a postgraduate education system in South Africa at the national level, at the heart must be quality. So quality postgraduate higher education sector. Then at the national level, what are the key elements that you need to consider when we think about quality? And for me, four, I think, important elements come to mind. We have to consider the size of the sector and all the implications that that has, and some of those implications were highlighted by Sue. We have to think about the shape of that sector and how it relates to what we aspire to be as a country, how it relates to what our economy requires, how it relates to the kind of graduates and graduate attributes that we want to develop, and the role that the graduates must play in society. We have to consider the success of that system, how successful it is, both in terms of efficiencies, but also beyond, in terms of the more qualitative aspirations that we seek to achieve. And that relates very much then to the substance of the postgraduate education and training sector. So for me, at the national level, those four dimensions need to be held in tandem if we're going to think about postgraduate education from a quality perspective and a quality lens. Working with any of them in isolation, setting targets around size, for example, which we do quite easily without thinking about the substance that needs to be in place to support that growth in size, shoots ourselves in the foot. If we grow in size, but we don't think about in what areas growth is needed, we shoot ourselves in the foot. So a whole range of interconnections here are required. I'm drawing my information sources from a range of CHE publications, and I want to acknowledge the presence of my colleague, Dr. Amani Saidi, who is our Director for Research, Monitoring and Advice. And Dr. Saidi leads a massive amount of work in the CHE. And many publications are starting to come out of the CHE. And I encourage all of you to look at the websites and to access those publications. I also see a number of people in the room that are contributing to the development and writing and the research that underpins those publications. And certainly we'd like to grow that pool much greater as we go forward. But we've already referenced the doctoral reviews, the doctoral degrees national report. There's a publication that I'll draw on quite heavily today. Shireen is in the room. Tala and Ahmed Isop was quite central in assisting us with this publication, soon to be published, on the shape and size of postgraduate education in South Africa, a 2005 to 2020 view of what's happened. Vital Stats is a really important publication that the CHE publishes every year. It's a data-based publication as well, giving stats on a range of indicators in higher education. Just recently, we've added a supplement to the Vital Stats. And the first one was produced in the last financial year. The next one is just about finalized. Our committee, Research Monitoring Evaluation Advice Committee, considered the publication yesterday, and it's moving forward towards finalization. And there you'll find a lot of information on funding of higher education, postgraduate funding, but also cohort studies in relation to masters and doctorates. So let's just have a look at the size of higher education first. And this slide is quite useful because, and I think I want to emphasize this as I talk, you know, that looking at postgraduate education in isolation to the broader education will give us a lens that probably is only half of the picture. And we have to locate our discussions on postgraduate education in tandem with what's happening in undergraduate education and even before post-school education and what's coming after in terms of where do our postgraduates move to. But you can see the sharp decline in size in relation to higher education when we go from undergraduate to our doctorate. Right? So that stands out quite starkly, that the size of postgraduate education, although it has grown substantially over the years, we have to ask the question whether the size is the size that you require for the aspirations of a developing nation like South Africa. And so you can see from the 2020 data, 2021 data, headcount enrollments and graduates, what the size looks like in terms of postgraduate education, where we move from about 40,000 enrollments, 40,000 graduates in postgraduate studies below masters to just over 3,500 enrollments in the doctoral program. So a stark decrease in the numbers. And that is mirrored in terms of enrollments and graduates. I've just put up the figures as well in terms of the shape, in terms of enrollments and the demographics of enrollments in postgraduate studies. And you can see from undergraduate to doctoral level, the picture changes quite substantially. Right? So we're at undergraduate level, we still have 64% of our graduates being female. At the doctoral level, we have 46% of our graduates being female. So the gender issue, as we transition along the postgraduate pipeline, is still an issue that we need to pay a significant attention to. One of the other ones that stand out quite starkly here is the participation of foreign students in our higher education system and how it grows from the undergraduate to the postgraduate. And you can see that. So if we look at foreign enrollment, international enrollment, in undergraduate studies, it's 2.6%. And then when you get to doctoral studies, the undergraduate enrollment is 37%. Which started to raise quite a lot of concerns in the higher education space, including at the highest levels of the ministry, and charges that international students were starting to push out South African students. And it was a reason why the minister came to the CHE to ask for the CHE to do some research on this matter in order to just kind of understand what's happening. And it underpinned the reason why we engaged with Shireen on the study that I've just referenced. That study clearly showed that yes, international enrollments in South African higher education in postgraduate studies is certainly growing, but the growth is not pushing out South African students. There are particular reasons why South African student participation is dropping over the postgraduate pathway, including reasons of support, including reasons of finance. The places are there, and when places are there, they are taken up. But in taking up those places, the study and the report clearly debunks the notion that there's any pushing out. It's not pushing out, it's inability to retain South African students on the pipeline that is creating this picture that we see. And I think the conversations in this group must also include that then. The issue of retaining South African students in the postgraduate pathway in order to build the pool of higher level skills that we need in the country. Just to look then from 2005 to 2020, how growth happened, and you can see the higher education system in general has grown, right? A 54% growth over the period. And that growth is seen both in undergraduate and in postgraduate education. So our system has become bigger from 2005 to 2020. If we look at postgraduate enrollments, and we try to disaggregate in terms of qualifications and try to understand where the growth is happening, you can see massive growth at the doctoral level, 150% growth at the doctoral level, but from a small base. Right? So you have to look at it from that base. But growth across the PG, Dip, Honours, Masters, and the doctorate. If we look at the shape of enrollments, the size of enrollments, in terms of race participation, you can also see, I think, the efforts around transformation, the efforts around access, the efforts around participation starting to bear fruit. And we start to note the increase in the participation of Black students at all levels of the postgraduate pathway. What's also coming quite strongly to the fore is the data starting to show a growing number of a group which we're calling unknown here. And I think we're starting to see quite significant resistance to students declaring demographic identity in terms of race. If you look in 2020, that number was about 4,000 of the group. So certainly a resistance to the race category, I think, growing in the discourse in South Africa, but still a need to track how we're doing in this regard. And we'll need to work with that dilemma. But you can see then that at this point in time, we have an 80% Black participation, 17% white participation, and 3% unknown. Very much in line with the demographics of the country. Okay, if we look at gender, and I've already made this point, and maybe not to harp on it too much, but we do have growing participation of females in our postgraduate programs, as evidenced by the data. And you can see the percentage change across all the years and in the qualifications. But what is noticeable is that as you go higher up the pipeline, the lower the participation of females. And so still an issue that we're needing to be addressing. Overall, a greater number of females are participating in postgraduate studies, in fact, in higher education broadly. But when you disaggregate, you will see the participation changes at the different levels and lesser as you go up the pipeline. So again, an issue to consider in this grouping, how do we ensure that we retain female students to the completion of the doctorate and grow numbers in that regard. What are the issues there that are still causing that kind of a distortion? Okay, in terms of nationality, just to look at this one in relation to the comments I made earlier, so you can see that we do have a growing percentage of international students participating in our postgraduate pathways. So you can see if we just look overall, the South African percentage of postgraduates in 2005 was 88%. In 2020, it's 85%. So decreasing proportion of postgraduate places are being held by South Africans, right? If you just look at, hone in on the doctorate, you can see the stark change here, that in 2005, 77% of our doctoral students were South African students. In 2020, that's dropped down to 63%. So we have a declining participation in terms of enrollment share. Numbers obviously are increasing, right? But in terms of enrollment share, we have a declining number of South African students, a declining proportion of South African students in our postgraduate studies, starkly at the doctoral level. And again, I want to make the point, we are not retaining sufficiently South African students along the postgraduate pathway. Okay, so in summary, overall postgraduate enrollments from 2005 to 2020 have increased by 53%, but proportionally has remained static at 14%. Right? So 14% of our higher education was postgraduate in 2005, 14% of our higher education in 2020 is postgraduate, which means we have a higher education system that is by and large an undergraduate higher education system. Right? Enrollments with respect to gender increased generally, but you can see the issue I've pointed out to in relation to participation at the different points along the pathway and how that decreases. Enrollments of Black South Africans increased by 82%, but the enrollment share also increased from 64 to 81%. So 81% of our postgraduate participation is Black South African, but when you disaggregate that according to our qualifications, it's 63% at the masters, 86% at the, 63% at the doctorate, 86% at the masters, and at the honors postgraduate level, 93%. So you can see that decline I'm talking about. From 93% at honors PG dip level to 88%, 86% at masters to 63% at doctorate. Again, emphasizing the loss along that pathway. Okay, and then enrollments from students from SADC, the rest of Africa and the world are generally on the increase. I want to skip the slide because I didn't mean to have it here. It's right at the end, it's a duplication. So shape. What I tried a little bit was to draw on CHE data that hasn't been mined before. And maybe just an invitation and maybe to have some conversations. Amani, I'm just throwing this out there and we can have some conversations around it later. But there's a lot of data at the CHE. And there's a lack of capacity at the CHE to mine that data, to understand that data, and to use that data. So, for example, the doctoral review generated masses of data. The current institutional audits underway are generating masses of data. There might be an opportunity for us to engage on a program to start to tap into that data, to get some information that will be of benefit to the system. And so an invitation for us to maybe discuss that a little bit. I think we just need to be more open around the data and to utilize the data more effectively. But what I tried to do here was to look at the accredited programs. So, you know, CHE through the HEQC accredits all the programs. And just to look at what are the postgraduate programs that have been accredited. So we can start to get a sense of the shape of postgraduate studies. And you can see we have a massive number of postgraduate qualifications. We have 5,600 separate postgraduate programs that have been accredited, HEQSF aligned. Now, that 5,600 of the 8,000 qualifications. So we talk about qualification proliferation. But what jumped out at me when I did this was the qualification proliferation is actually at the postgraduate level, where we have the bulk of programs. So you have the bulk of programs, but a smaller number of students. And so I think we just need to dig into this a little bit deeper, understand it, look at where these programs are, look at how active these programs are, look at enrollments in them, you know, just understand all of that much, much better. But then you can see the numbers. Just to indicate, we have growing private higher education involvement in postgraduate studies as well. Not as large currently as the publics, where we have 5,300 of those programs versus 230 in privates. There's a growing participation. Also to note that a lot of the public programs, and it's a point that's also made in the doctoral review report, have utilized the way of naming qualifications to create very individualized So a doctor, a PhD in, you know. Whereas in some of the other institutions, there's generics with specializations that kind of are not named programs, but are dealt with in a generic. And we need to think about that and how we work with that as well going forward. Okay, so you can see, this might not be very visible, you get the slides afterwards, but this gives you a sense of the private higher education involvement in postgraduate studies. Quite extensive. Right? The numbers of programs in some of them might be very small, but there's a growing number of more bigger institutions, or some of the institutions that are starting to develop quite a significant postgraduate footprint in private higher education. And hence my emphasis then to work as a system. Because if we're strengthening, growing, understanding the issues just in the public sector, it's only part of the system and not the whole. Okay, the universities, and then you can see where I'm going to call them culprits, where the culprits are in relation to big numbers of programs. UP already knows this, we're working with UP on this issue. But UP has many, many discrete, separate postgraduate programs. Other institutions that are just as much involved in postgraduate studies have much smaller ones. So if you compare WITS, for example, to UP, you'll see the number of programs at UP very huge, and the number of programs at WITS smaller. And so we need to understand that and just kind of understand what to do the best for the system going forward. It really becomes quite difficult to manage the scale of program proliferation in the system. Okay, shaped by field of study, right? You can see here the intentions to grow science, engineering, and technology are kind of bearing out. Yeah? So in 2005, where 26% of the enrollments were in SET, by 2020 that is now 36%. Right? And you'll see then where the decrease is. The decrease is in the humanities from 27 to 25, and a big decrease in education from 25 to 11%. Yeah? Again, I mean, what's the reasons underpinning that? What's driving that? Is it just a funding formula? It's issues we need to dig into. But certainly, this is in line with the targets that were set. Shireen, the report does pick out a concern on the declining enrollments in humanities, which actually has gone below 40%. If you combine 25 and 11 of education and humanities, it gives you 36%, where the national target was 40%. So we have a decline in humanities, and what does that mean as well? Okay, let me just turn my attention to a success, and hopefully I still have a little bit of time. Couple of minutes. Okay, postgraduate graduation rates. Stephanie did refer to this. Multiple definitions of this, but the definition that the CHE uses is the number of graduates in a particular year versus the number of enrollments. It counts enrollments in that year as a proportion, right? And that's what's used here. And you can see improved graduation rates. Despite the increasing numbers and all of that, improved graduation rates from 2005 to 2020, from 25% to 33%. And then you can see where the big one is in the PG dip, quite a significant increase, and then smaller increases in the masters and the doctorates. It's not a very good indicator. There's a lot of flaws with it, because, I mean, when you have tails in qualifications and quite long tails, then it impacts on this calculation and so on. But it does give you an overall indication. More useful is to track cohorts through throughput rates and dropout rates. And then I pointed to the data that the CHE is drawing on this, and the reports that have come out yearly from the CHE on cohorts now that will enable us to track this going forward. But yet, you can see the 2016 first-time entry cohort into the masters, honors and the masters. And you can see how we are experiencing quite significant attrition still, right? So, I mean, honors, right? Let's say 2 years. I mean, it's 1 year, 120 credits, say 1 year, if we spoke about regulation time and all that, but we have part-time students, and then we also have the issues of support and the range of socio-economic issues that impact on study time. But you can even see after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of entry, 84% of the students have gone through. And it starts to stabilize at about that point, right? Which means that we had a 16% attrition rate in the masters, in the honors. So 16% of the students that were originally taken in didn't complete. But where is the dropout? The dropout in the very early years, right? Where you can see the dropout after first year is already 13%. After the second year is already 15%. So we're not retaining in the early years. Yeah? We're losing students on entry, basically. No? In that first year, in that second year. And so what do we do about that? And that's consistent across all of these qualifications. You can see in the masters, 64% throughput after that number of years, 36% a dropout. Right? So I agree with Sue that this is an international issue, right? It's dropout in postgraduate studies. But I think it's amplified in our context. Certainly the data seems to indicate that, right? The research masters, right? 41% have dropped out by 2020 after entering in 2015, and the doctorate at 33%. I mean, you still expect some people to come back and be in the system, but that's what the data shows. So we have concerning throughput rates and concerning dropout rates. And certainly that's a conversation that we must also have. This part of the presentation hones in then on some of the more qualitative issues underpinning these kind of patterns that we see, right? Funding-related challenges has been emphasized. Our postgraduate studies at universities are insufficiently funded at the level of the institution, but also at the level of the students. And that gives rise to a whole range of issues. It was interesting, I attended a portfolio committee meeting yesterday where the CHE was supposed to present, but didn't present in the end because of an issue. But there was presentations from NRF, and presentations from DHET, and presentations from NIHSS on the postgraduate funding issue. And all those presentations were consistent in recognizing the dearth of funding for postgraduate studies. So it is being talked about at the national level, but that talk needs to translate into some form of action going forward. And we've made a point about doctoral students. In fact, our postgraduate students, many numbers of them participating in part-time modalities, and that's impacting as well. And maybe as a result of funding challenges and a need to earn while studying. Supervision challenges, right? Impacting on throughput and dropout. I think we must take cognizance of the fact that when we look for reasons underpinning the data, pointing fingers at the students is not where the answers lie. Right? It's the system, by and large, that we've created and that we are sustaining that is causing the patterns that we see. Preparedness, right? And here I want to talk then about what's happening prior to the postgraduates. What's happening in undergraduate studies, where people are progressing from undergraduate studies but still struggling in postgraduate studies. So in discussions about the postgraduate, we must be discussing the undergraduates. And in discussions about the undergraduate, we must be discussing the schooling system, because it's the pipeline that's creating the issues that we see at the higher levels of that pipeline. Right? Lack of programs, lack of facilities. I'm not going to emphasize all of this. Stephanie picked this up, all coming from the doctoral review. Slow and limited. I think this is a big issue. 2 professional doctorates. Of those many thousands of doctorates you saw, 2 of them are professional doctorates. The rest are the more general research doctorates.